Welcome, everybody. Richard, welcome. Thanks for joining me for the first time on the stream.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This would be great.
So Richard is development of software, director of software development for one of our teams at thoughtbot, a team that works on existing code bases, helping improve them, scale them, deal with performance things. So this is right up Richard's alley because today we are going to be pulling up a service that we run internally at thoughtbot that I often work on the stream called Hub. And it has a test suite that takes, we haven't figured out why it takes different times yet. Apparently on my computer it takes about 9 minutes to run. I think on Richard's it takes longer, 11, something like that.
13.
13.
I just ran it right before this. It was 13. So.
And we are going to work on improving that speed. Now, Richard, you mentioned this to me like a couple weeks ago. You created a GitHub issue about the performance of the test suite. And last week, not on the stream, I poked at it a little bit and started in the obvious place of factory usage and managed to switch one of the factories out for a lighter weight factory with less associations and got like a 30% reduction in the test suite speed. So that was awesome, but I should have done it on the stream because now today we're starting from scratch. We don't have the next thing figured out. So that's what we're gonna start doing. We're gonna bring up the code and then we're gonna show how to identify some hotspots in the test suite performance and figure out where we should focus.
Yeah, and one thing I had tried before this as well was trying to work with FactoryBot and reduce the usage of create, trying to use build and build stub to reduce the I/O. But I wasn't seeing anywhere near the dramatic increase that you got. So kind of interested to see where we could take this.
Yeah. So if you have questions along the way, just say hi. And oh, that's the wrong banner. Yeah, questions are always welcome. And so just drop them in the chat. We'll see them and we'll get them. Especially today, we're anticipating we're going to be running the specs quite a bit. So there's going to be some downtime in between the changes we make. So we'd love to get your questions along the way. Oh, and I guess I would be remiss that this is the kind of work that we do for clients. And so if you need this help, definitely get in touch at thoughtbot.com/hire us. We are more than happy to help you with that. Cool, let me stop the music and bring up the code. So here we are in the editor here. So we are, we're in the Rails app code base. It's called Hub. Let's just create a branch using my trusty tool, get remote branch, to make sure I always create remote branches right away. Okay, Richard, so when faced with a situation of we know that there is a slow test suite, how might we get started?
Well, usually what you're trying to figure out is baseline what might be contributing to it. So I'm looking for where the bottlenecks are and what's actually adding it up. And so one of the gems that we have in there is test prof, and I hadn't worked with that. I saw that in Hub there, and so tried that out. There's a number of different settings in there that let us take a look. And one that I did was let us see which factories are being used. And that was using the fprof equal 1 environment variable just before running RSpec. And then that listed out some factories usage. And so from the last time we ran it, which was 3 days ago, we have those results, which can save us about 11 to 13 minutes if we
Yeah.
just share that. So, so
So, yeah, do you want to, can you paste? Can you want to paste into,
yeah, we could try it. See if it'll let me. Oh, it didn't let me.
okay.
Oh, copied. No, it's not letting me drop it
Okay,
in.
no problem. So what are you seeing in those results?
Yeah, so there's two pieces of information in there that are interesting. So to list out all of the factories that are being used, and it'll do it in the descending order of how often the factory is being invoked. And then you can also see the total time it's taking, the time per call, the top level time that it's consuming overall. And so in this particular case, the user factory is getting invoked the most, but the assignment factory seems to be taking up 2 minutes of the overall runtime. So that looks like the best place to start to see if we can get a handle on it. And what you had done earlier was recognize that working with a person, which was another factory had in there, there was a trait in there or a version of it for with position. By reducing the use of that one, you save quite a bit of time. So that was one of the places. So one of the concerns I have about looking at assignment is that's going to be a pretty top level factory,
Yeah.
but it might have a lot of associations like you're seeing there. And the other
It
thing I'm
does.
wondering is we have after build, and this is where I think your familiarity with FactoryBot is going to help. I was wondering if the after having an after create would be different than the after build, or if the after build logic gets used either way.
After build gets used either way because it's a little bit like the active record callbacks. It's like build is going to get called along the way of creation.
Okay, so that's not necessarily a spot, but how we're using it might be.
Yeah, so this is definitely a problem spot for the application. The issue is that an assignment is a collection of days that we work on a project. And it's not really valid with no days.
Right.
And so but the way that this factory is working now, you can see that what it's doing is it's saying, okay, let's take the person and find out what days they work from the week of the assignment. By default, that is Monday through Friday. So the person factory that's being created here is Monday through Friday. And then let's take the attribute on the assignment, which is the expected day, total days worked in the week. So it might on this project. So it might be if the person's on the project 2 days, it might be 2. Or if they're on the project 4 days, it would be 4. And then it loops through those days and creates a day assignment for each one. And then if the factory is being set with a confirmed work days, it then goes and it confirms the time on that many days.
So we're treating it as if those days have already been confirmed, that they've been completed.
Yeah, if the person creating the factory says confirmed work days explicitly.
Okay.
So if someone just uses the assignment factory in the specs, what it is going to do by default is create a person with a position. So that's not just 2 additional models being created. A position has the person, and then a department, a team, a company, and an employment type. So that's creating, 4 additional associated objects. The reason why we are and probably need to continue calling person with position is because assignments you can't create an assignment for a person who doesn't have a position. It's not possible to do that. It'll fail validations if you attempt to create a assignment for someone who's not working. So then a project is also created for an assignment. The default work days is being used. So that would be 4, because we by default schedule people for 4 days. So that means that when we get to this part, so default person is going to be working Monday through Friday. The default days is 4. So that means for every assignment being created, there would be 4 day assignments created by default. And then if you're in a spec explicitly setting confirmed work days, then it's going to loop back through those day assignments and update them to be confirmed for their expected amount. So the most obvious way to thing we could do, because we can't create a person without a position for assignment because it'll fail that validation, would be to change it so that by default an assignment either is not for 4 days, or that the person doesn't work a Monday through Friday schedule. So everything is still valid, but basically we would be trying to make it so that the default assignment is for less time than a full week. In fact, we could make the default assignment be a valid assignment with no time on it. Or one, like a very minimal, like 1 day. I don't know that we can create an assignment for no days.
Yeah, that might be
no
weird.
expected days.
It also depends on how it's being used in most of the tasks as well.
Right. So that's my concern about that change, is that it's going to cause a lot of specs to potentially fail. Now, the way I generally write specs, though, is I don't try to use the factory implicitly. So, for example, if I'm writing a spec that, let's try to find one actually, because we have a bunch of specs that like check to see whether the revenue is being calculated correctly. When I write a spec like that, I try to say, I'm expecting there to be 4 days on this assignment. I don't take it for granted that the factory is being created. I try not to because I want to, when I look at a spec file, to see everything that I depend on, right, in that spec file. So let's see if we can find a revenue spec that does that. Oh, this is really interesting, Richard. So this revenue spec's not even using assignment. It's using day assignments. And what day assignments do is when they're created, if an matching assignment doesn't exist for them, it creates the matching assignment. But
which
you
means
can see,
in this case, it might be doing 2 different assignments then?
Yeah, this is doing one for the beginning of the month plus 4 days and the beginning of the month plus 5 days. So those are going to be in the same assignment.
Okay.
Let's but here's what I was talking about, where I bet if we go look at the day assignment factory, the billing percentage default is 1 and the
Mm-hmm.
confirmed amount of day is 1. But because it's really important for the spec, this spec, that those are those values, we include them in the spec, even though they are the defaults. Now, not everyone writes their specs that way, to be perfectly honest, but generally speaking, it's the way that I would recommend, because not only is it more explicit, but it helps with the problem we're dealing with right now, which is if the factory changes, you don't break this spec because you weren't depending on a default value from the factory for this spec.
And in this particular, in a lot of those settings aren't contributing to the time anyway, but it is helping to communicate to the next person that comes in what's going on. So
yeah, so let's see. Okay, here are some specs that call a method called create assignment. So that method is taking a person, project, and a date, and it's creating an assignment. And it's using the confirmed work days.
mm-hmm.
So this is sort of what I was saying, which is this spec, which is depending on, because it's doing revenue calculations for confirmed days, is explicitly doing the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just we've gone. Let's just experiment. Let's see what happens if we look at this. So let's run this spec. And if you have any ideas, feel free to
Yeah, I was, so there we know that it was almost 4 seconds. I wonder what you would get if you put the fprof,
mm-hmm.
what is it, fprof true?
That's a good idea.
Oh, fprof equal 1. Then we can see how it's actually using those.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good idea. So here's the assignment. And it's done 3 times. There's the 3 assignments.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those uses the same person and project. So the team, company, department, position are all the same. So there's only one being created of those. And there's only one person.
It's still interesting because we see that the assignment factory is still the most expensive factory that
exactly.
we're using, even though we're not going to necessarily save that much time in this particular spec.
Yeah. I'm just wondering why as I was looking at this, why day assignment doesn't show up there.
So in the factory, though, we build that in, don't we? Yeah, we do.
Mm-hmm.
It says top level.
Oh, top level and then total. So I would have expected some day assignments to be here. So let's just look at that. It's doing expected work days defaults to 4. So I would have expected 4 day assignments to be built there.
I would too, but I wonder if we can see a change to how it behaves by just doing what you said earlier, changing line 6 to go ahead and just show 1 day and see if that modifies how it behaves.
So let's run that again. So I wanted to learn two things. Not only will this affect the performance, but will the spec pass or fail? Um, and you can see that it fails. Now, did it affect the performance?
Looked like it did.
So we had total time in factories of 0.669 before, and it was 1.2 before.
If you look at the time per call on the assignment, that went down by quite a bit.
The total time per the time per call was 0.22, and here it's 0.07. So yeah, it's a pretty significant savings, but it did make the spec fail. So now this create so let's just think about the ways that we could fix that. The reason why it failed is because the spec isn't it's assuming that expected work days is being set by the factory to be that. So now if we run this, the spec will pass, but it's going to be back to the old performance. Yeah, 0.21. Yep. So we have a couple ways we could address that. We could adjust the spec to only use one day.
But that'll go ahead and impact a lot of tests potentially.
Yeah, so that is, yes.
There's also, when we're running that factory, we're using build to do the day assignments, but that would have been another potential, was the way it was the day assignments being built, a spot that we could improve, or the factory itself for day assignments.
Yeah, so because the assignment factory is so large, we are trying to be judicious about using build or stub when we're using it when we can. But because it has so many associated records with it, and it needs to be a valid person with a valid position, for example, in order to pass the validations, a lot of the specs for assignments require the assignment to be saved to actually exercise what the assignment is doing. So one thing we could do is we've changed the factory, right? So now we could get a sense of how big the problem or how big the spec failure problem would be by like, if we just run the model specs. I think this will do that. So this is running just the model specs, and we're going to be able to get a sense of how many failures changing the default to one day will actually give us. It's not as many as I was afraid of.
Yeah, I was expecting a few more. So I think the controllers would be the next likely place we'd run into it. Or the requests.
My guess is that the specs the reason why I went to the revenue calculation specs is that's the most likely place where we're expecting there to be a certain amount of days and have it actually matter, because for like the scheduling specs and those kinds of things, then like they're almost certainly going to explicitly be setting the dates that they expect. So the spec wouldn't fail with that change, but we're not going to get as big of a performance improvement because they're explicitly setting 4 days. Okay, this is more like it in terms of failures. Yeah.
Got more than 10. Yeah. There is it'll be interesting to see what those end up being. I was thinking through, if we were to make like the default behavior of the factory to be 1 day, and just go in and modify those specs that count on it being more, would we see in other specs where, like you said, it probably doesn't matter? Is there anything that the original author was assuming about having multiple days? In other words, having only one sort of adjustment to how the spec itself ran.
Right.
But even
So,
reducing it down to 2 would help.
yeah, I mean, it would be a 50% savings on the default. Or not quite 50% because there's other things being created, but
yeah.
So the other area that we know a lot of time is being spent in the specs is the feature specs. So we're not testing JavaScript or anything in isolation in this application. We're doing everything through feature specs. And the request and the controller specs are pretty minimal. They're mostly used for testing edge cases or negative cases. Right. So we have very full feature spec coverage over the entire application, testing basically every feature of the application. But we only go to Chrome and the JavaScript driver for ones that actually depend on JavaScript. We use the Capybara default Rails test driver for ones that don't depend on JavaScript.
It's a good point. We could, I mean, we're looking at the factories now, but one, like you ran this RSpec all against the models, and we'll get a time from that. We can also just run it against the requests and features and see whether that's more or less than the models overall and decide whether that's a better place to pay attention.
Okay, so our specs finished. And where's assignment here? So we actually didn't run this in advance. We probably should have. And we can put it back and run it again if we wanted to see the total time. But the total time was 45 seconds, which strikes me as probably being a pretty significant decrease. Because you had said at the beginning it was over 2 minutes, right? On when you ran it?
Across the entire suite, but yeah.
Across the whole suite. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at some of the failures.
What also jumped out at me, and I don't think it's unexpected, but the time spent in factory is like 80 or 90% of the total time of the specs, the model specs.
So the time spent in is 3 minutes and 17 seconds out of 3 minutes and 47 seconds.
Yeah, so whatever business logic we have in the models isn't really consuming most of the test time.
Right. Okay. So let's look at the nature of the failures. So yeah, this is a revenue calculation being depending on, and now it's the certain number of days being there. This is also a revenue calculation. So we're expecting a full week and now we're only getting the 1 day. So it's, you can even tell it's 250 instead of 1,000. So how many failures did we get? We got 28 failures out of 2,452 specs. That's not that bad.
It's not.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and some of these, and I don't know because we'd have to look, but some of these we may not really care what the value was. We just care that it's the expected one. So we may not necessarily have to change how the factory is used there. We just may have to look at the test and see whether we care about the and just change the number.
Yeah, exactly. And so this one is the first non-revenue one that I see. And it's basically a similar thing, which is we're creating some assignments for a project and we want to make sure that total confirmed work weeks across all the weeks of the thing totals the amount that we expect. So we expected 5, and for this purposes of this spec, what we care about is probably that the number is what we expected, not the specific number.
Yeah.
But it's very similar to the revenue ones, but all these are all revenue ones. This is average rate calculation, so it's very similar. Oh, this isn't. Oh, so this spec, every week people register how they're feeling about the project, and it's weighted by the schedule, like whether they spend more time on the project or not. So changing the number of days probably flipped it from being positive to being negative as the weighting changed.
Yeah, it's interesting that I expected to be negative, but we don't know what the settings were.
So 28 specs, I don't know. So what's your take? If you were faced with this situation that we're in now, where we could potentially get a significant savings and we're going to break 28 specs and need to make changes in them.
Well, it's probably what you said before. If we have a baseline for what the models were before, we could see if it's significant enough time to be worth the effort of going ahead and adjusting them. The other cases, we don't know how much this affects things like the features and requests specs. So it could be a lot more than 28. So in that case, understanding the amount of time before we make all those changes probably is important. So because you don't want to spend a lot of time changing and then not get a lot back.
Yeah. So while we're talking, I'm going to run the features with fprof and we can see. But 28 is a lot less than I was afraid of.
I agree.
And so it doesn't seem like it might not be one we want to go through on the stream, but it doesn't seem like an insurmountable thing to me.
Not at all. Yeah.
And so what we would need, like you were saying, what we need to do though, if we went down that, is we need to look at the spec and say, okay, so this is failing because we expect 10,000. We got 12,000. This is a method that returns how much budget on a project is remaining based on the scheduled time.
That one's interesting. Oh, it's
the budget remaining. So by scheduling less time on the project, there's more budget remaining.
That makes sense. Okay. The second one of those create assignments is setting the expected, but the first one is where it would vary.
Yeah. So what was happening before was it was creating 4 days and confirming 2 of them, and now it's creating 1 day.
In confirming 2 of those.
Right. So for the case of this spec, I think we would probably want to make it so that we're spotting a case where, this was dependent on the factory being a specific value. We might want to address that. So we might want to say expected work days too.
Is it important to the logic that the test is going that the expected work days is greater than the number confirmed? unscheduled remaining units. So right now we're saying there were 2 expected and confirmed dates, but there's one more day that
Mhm.
being budgeted as the unscheduled remaining. Is
Right.
that the logic going
So
on?
so
Okay.
yeah, so you're absolutely right to question that, and I don't know the answer right off the top of my head, and that's the kind of decision that I think you got to be careful with as you work through this, because there's like the easiest thing to do would be to just change this to 4, because
Mhm.
that's what the factory was. And then this spec should pass again. But we didn't
Yes.
solve, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Keep going.
But we didn't solve the performance problem of this spec by doing that.
No, but we might be able to get at what they were attempting with 3 expected work days, if we think it matters to the logic. It's
Mhm.
probably something where not knowing the logic of the spec and not perhaps wanting to take the time to really understand the algorithms, I might just try a couple of various days, just focus on this one spec with, marketed as
Mhm.
focus, and then run it a couple times and see if I get different behaviors.
Right. The the other approach would be, because we only had 28 out of more than 2000 specs fail, to
Mhm.
say we got the performance, say the majority of the performance we're going to get, worrying about this individual 28 specs is
Mhm.
not where all the time was. So just putting expected work days there as 4 and
Mhm.
moving on is probably fine, because
That's a
worst
good
case
point.
scenario, we've done that on 28 specs
Mhm.
out of 2400. That would probably be the way that I would go from a, you get the low hanging fruit, and then you move on to the next big change that you can make.
Can you I agree. Can you roll back up to the profile back when you ran the all the models?
Yeah,
I want to see if day
this is right
assignment
here.
showed up.
It's right here.
That is for the models or for the features?
This is for the models.
Oh, okay. And day assignments there showed up. So
It
we
did
know
show
that
up,
we're only
yeah.
hit it 241 times. Because we would have expected prior, and I know we didn't run it before, but we would expect that number to be a lot less, the number of times it invoked it. And
Right.
so to your point, yeah, we've probably 28 out of 200 and whatever, or whatever it was before, because presumably it was 4 times that number, probably isn't going to cost us that much.
Right.
What is also interesting is that assignment is twice as large as day assignment in terms of the top level time. Again, that only yields us 20 seconds if we could solve it completely, which of course we couldn't, but
Mm-hmm.
so it may not be the best use of focus. But it is interesting that there's that many other things going on in assignment. When we did that one more targeted one, it looked like it was the day assignment was going to be a greater proportion.
Yeah.
Of course, now we're only doing 1 day assignment, so maybe that's what that reveals.
Yeah, possibly. So we ran all those feature specs. We had only two failures, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's positive.
Yeah, and I don't think that first one has anything to do with the assignment.
It does not. In fact, I just opened a pull request for this
Uh,
problem.
okay.
There's a JavaScript component which is not fully accessible, but it dynamically, it's the autocomplete for select boxes. And so if there are more than 12 items in a select box, it will be converted into a this JavaScript component. And if there are less, it doesn't do it. And so I think that might be why it's a flaky spec, because if it is being converted, then it fails the accessibility audit because the JavaScript component fails the accessibility object
Oh, interesting.
audit. So really, we only have one related failure, and that's a thing that checks that we got the expected revenue that we did. So
And
let's,
we're and
oh,
we're
go ahead.
also seeing that the total time for the these were requests, right? The total time for the request was six
They were the
minutes.
feature
Oh,
specs.
features. Okay, thanks. The features were 6 minutes, and the models were total of how much? Like, if we're looking at the whole overall thing, where to spend our time beyond the factory itself, are we going to get more bang out of the?
Right. It was 3 minutes in the factories for the model specs out of 3 minutes and 47 seconds um, for all the models to run.
Okay.
And this is 6 minutes out of, so it's 6 minutes, but
Mm-hmm.
only a minute of the 6 minutes is spent in factories.
So presume almost half of the time, and I know we've already addressed
Mm-hmm.
one thing. Almost half of the time well, more than half the time, given the speed of your runs, because yours have been faster, um, spent on these requests or these features.
So does that mean that
It has me paying. So we're in the
mm-hmm.
middle of the factories, and
Yeah.
I would normally just finish out the factories and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that I at least finished a body of work there.
Mm-hmm.
But it does kind of suggest to me, is there something I can do low hanging fruit? Should I turn my attention over to the features overall and maybe move off of the factories and see if there's something with the factories that may get me a bigger return than continuing to dive down more of the factories at the front, especially when they may not be used as much in the more expensive tests.
Yeah, I think that that's a good call. So let's so what we would do here, and I think I will do this, and maybe we'll come back to it. Um, would be to go through these 28 specs, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and put them to what they either, if it's straightforward, to put them back to what they expected to make them pass, or if it's obvious that just one day is fine, I would just make it one day, um, and get those all green. And then what we would be seeing there is, you know, we'd be shaving off a good chunk of the runtime, probably about 30 seconds or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So let's just commit. Uh, I'm just going to rename the branch to test suite perf
Okay.
uh, assignment.
The other reason to want to go fix those 28 is it's just a lot of fun having your tests turn green after you're walking through them. Gives you that sense of completion.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to commit reduce assignment factory to 1 day, and then push that up. And then I'm going to go back to main and create a new branch to suite performance features. Okay, so now let's poke at the features and see what our performance run showed us that it's 6 minutes long, and a
Mm-hmm.
minute of that time is spent in factories. So we're not going to, by changing factories, we're not going to get a significant savings from the feature specs from working on the factories more.
Right. One of my concerns on the feature specs is we're going to discover that a lot of that time is just standing up the browser that we can't really get around.
Yeah, it's only I forget what, it's like 20 or 30 seconds
Oh,
to to get the browser going and set up. Um, So there's a way to have to print out the slowest features. Do you know off the top of your head what that is?
So you'd go to the underneath spec directory, there's a spec helper, and then down in there, there's profile. Yeah, so if we scroll down there a little ways, got the random. Oh, we don't have it listed in here. Let me.
I think it's in the circles. The circle CI config actually. A dash profile 10.
Yeah, we can just add it when we're running it. We can add it to the config later too if we need the setting.
So what this is going to do is it's going to run so this is my general flow when it comes to feature specs. I don't know if you have any tips, but my general flow is find the slowest ones and look at those and see, is there a pattern here or a trend here of something that I might be able to change that has an impact on more than just one spec. And that, I guess that's the general philosophy when we're just starting out on this of trying to reduce spec time, is if you go into any one spec and you spend 3 hours trying to get it from down, unless you're changing the actual strategy that impacts multiple tests, any one spec actually doesn't contribute. It's rare that you find one spec contributing 30% of the test time.
Absolutely. The other advantage of going with the very slowest test that you're going this way is, even if you do find that what you adjust may not, for that single spec, be worth it, you may, because it's easier to see with a slower test what the effect is, you may lift out those strategies you were talking about, those patterns, at least inform you about things you can take a look overall and give you some hypotheses to run down.
Right. So this is going to take 6 minutes. So
yes, it will.
So we have a question from Dyson Returns. Dyson, can I call you Dyson? Asks, should YJIT, how do you pronounce it? Did you just say YJIT?
Yeah, that's how I said it.
I don't know. I've only ever seen it spelled out. I don't know that I've said it out loud before. Be enabled for one's test suite. Would it make my test suite run fast? I do not know the answer to this question. Do you, Richard?
I don't. I want to check this out. I think that'd be interesting to see.
So, do you know, does Ruby 3 not, this is, so YJIT is the new compiler, I guess, just-in-time compiler for Ruby. And it's not enabled by default.
Yeah, and I think if I recall right, it started to be updated more than 3.2, if I remember that off the top of my head. But yeah, absolutely. And I haven't played with it much. I think the new Prism parser came out a little later, but I think the YGIT that started switching over a point version or two before it. But still, I want to run it and see what it does.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not something that's in my toolbox yet. So I'd be curious. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so Dyson says in 3.2 it starts kicking butt, seriously. So that's interesting. We could after this, when we're ready to sort of look for something else, we can give that a try and see whether it has an impact.
Well, and if we discover it does, then the next question, and maybe Dyson knows the answer to this, is can we adjust like our RSpec config files to just use that out of the box so that
Right.
future uses of RSpec, we just depend on that.
So when finding changes that you're making for performance reasons to just the tests, one of the questions that will come up is, is this a safe change? Like, is it going to expose us to a problem in production that we don't have, that wasn't caught by the tests because we did something special for the tests?
Yeah. Yeah, the worst case is the test looks like it's passing and doesn't jump out at you, and yet the assumptions in the test are subtle, and like you said, you get a false positive when you discover
Or
it in the
another
field.
example is the concept of for the feature specs, we circumvent the login screens so that to write a feature spec, you don't need to go through the login screens. We basically set in the rack middleware, you're logged in as this user. And we really need to make sure then that we have separate coverage that doesn't do that tests the login screens.
Yep.
So we're creating that shortcut, but we need to make sure we have coverage that covers the shortcut that we're introducing.
Absolutely. Which is always a risk when you bypass anything with the login screens, for sure.
So I recently made another change in this, which removed the write-ahead logs from Postgres in the test environment.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah. Did you get a pretty good gain out of that?
No, it was basically no change. But since it's low risk, I left it in place. But it was basically no change.
It must offload the actual I/O for that elsewhere.
Yeah, or it's what I was thinking was other people have said there was gains on other projects. I wonder whether their performance characteristics of their computer are different, like if they're not on Apple Silicon or something like that, or SSD performance or something. Does that matter more?
Yeah.
I think we're almost through the features now.
It'll be interesting if the WineJIT does speed it up significantly. That would imply that we're not dealing with a lot of I/O that's slowing down the tests. Because I would think that I/O is probably the biggest impact on test speed.
Yeah, I would guess that in general you're right about that. Like what we saw with the model specs is very little time was actually spent in Ruby. It was all factory database stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so what we have here is the top 10. I feel like David Letterman. The top 10 slowest examples of our feature specs. Number 10.
That's right.
Okay, so the slowest one. So the 10 slowest are 49 seconds, which is 12.7% of the total time. The slowest one is the one for viewing the schedule at 8.49 seconds.
So what I would probably do at this point is I would go find that one. I'd mark it for focus. I'd probably rerun it for the baseline, and then I'd probably go ahead and try the YJIT.
Just for fun? Yeah, let's do it. Not just for fun, but like, yeah, let's do it. It will
and
be
what's
fun
interesting is this one
it.
does have, and this one does have JS True on it. So that probably is part of it.
Yep. So let's run it on just the spec. So this is going to be the first one spinning up Chrome. So it's going to be
part of why we want to baseline it separately. So we're comparing apples to apples.
Cool. So it took 12.68 seconds to run it.
Mhm.
Okay. So what is it? Why Ruby? Here, I'll get it.
Yeah.
So what we're doing now is we're going to try that. YJIT.
Just put your hand on your laptop and see if it gets warmer when you do this.
So what can you tell us about YJIT, Richard? What actually is it?
I actually haven't played with it much. I mean, the just-in-time element, but I think it's just a new engine for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I haven't played with it much at all.
So I'm running it again just to see whether it's real, or whether it's just So it fluctuates a little bit, but we did get a savings
Mm-hmm.
from 12.68 to 11.9, and that's just on one. And it was 11.58 the second time.
Still half a second. So
Yeah. So let's look at this spec, and while that spec runs, let's
yeah, do the whole thing.
do this whole thing and see what we get. Okay, so this is the spec. Oh, this is interesting because this slowest spec is one of the newest specs
Oh, yeah.
added. It is for the indicate that a user has been on our project longer than 6 months, which is just a feature that we added a few months ago.
Do you know if it's important to? Oh, I guess it is because the assignment.
Exactly.
You have to
So
have the
it's
personal
creating
acquisition.
6 months of
Mhm.
assignments.
Ouch. I wonder. I don't know how the logic within for actually doing it matters, but I was depending on how the logic inside the function works. Do you actually need every assignment in between the start and the end to be created in order for that to matter?
I'm almost positive that you do.
Okay.
So the agenda model. Assignments project should rotate.
Starts on between the start.
So it's checking to see whether there is an assignment for that person 6 months.
Yeah, and it's going by the overall count of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So we're not going to save anything by reducing the assignments.
So this is one philosophical thing, which is there are times where, or maybe it's not philosophical, maybe philosophical is the wrong word. There's been times that I'm doing this work where I realize, oh, the test is really slow and it's completely unrelated, but there's also a performance problem with the implementation of this. And there can be times where those two things line up and you say, it's worth fixing the performance problem of the implementation so that then my test will also be faster and the application will be faster for users. I'm not saying this is one of those cases, but I happen to know we already cache a bunch of stuff on assignments. We cache, and you might have noticed this because you were working on investment time flag and everything. Like flags like that are cached on assignment for performance reasons. So on an assignment, we cache, when the assignment's created, we, we cache the department of the person who's working on it. We cache whether it's investment time, what its billable rate is, those kinds of things. And if any of those things, and we have infrastructure in place where if any of those things change, then it goes back and updates all the assignments for those cache values. And we do that for a bunch of different reasons for performance, because assignment is used so much, and drawing the schedule with 100 people on it is expensive.
Yeah.
And also you want to be able to look at an assignment and know whether it's the last week of the project or not without having to or is this billable or not without having to go look at the project all the time. Because otherwise you introduce a bunch of N+1 queries. Right. And in order to get rid of the N+1 queries, you then need to join against this other big table, and that has performance So it's possible, knowing that we already have the infrastructure to cache things on assignment automatically, then I could get distracted, but in a good way, and say, you know what, let's cache how long someone has been on the project on assignment itself. So then our feature spec, we would get the benefit of, we could just create an assignment that says that it has been going on for 6 months.
Could, because we generally only update one person at a time when we're actually playing around with assignments in the schedule. So you get the benefit of the cache for everybody else. I hadn't looked at that in the assignment though. So interesting.
Yeah, so that would be one strategy. I don't know how confident I would be with that change. And I do try to, if we're working on test speed performance, I try to avoid getting sidetracked by making application changes. Unless I really, unless it's obviously going to be a big win.
Yeah, and there's quick ways to go ahead and just timestamp the delta of the time that you enter it versus returning, just to see if that's how much the test was taking up, if it actually was the application code or not, or if it was the test setup.
Yeah. So actually that's a great thing, especially when we think about talking about how we approach this. I think after the YJIT run of these features, that is what I think we should do, which is basically figure out how much time is spent in the different parts of this spec.
Yeah.
Okay, so YJIT run, the total time with YJIT was 6 minutes and 32 seconds. And previously, it was 6 minutes and 33 seconds. Yeah. So we didn't get a significant savings from doing that.
It's a great idea though.
Yeah.
And if we had a less IO intensive scenario, we might have seen better.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also possible, like, if we wanted to explore this more, I would probably run it on the models and see whether there's a change there. But since the test suite is slow, let's stay.
And Dyson's also asking what Ruby version we're on.
3.
I think we're on a pretty, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, we're on 3.3. Awesome, thanks. Thanks, Dyson. That's a good idea. And one I think we should look at more. Cool. Okay, so how do we pinpoint where the different performance, or where the timing is for the different sections of the spec?
So I I haven't really used it with Hub, but there's a gem out there that I wrote years back when I used to do traces that would actually let me drop in timestamps pretty quickly, and I could
Mm-hmm.
see what the delta was. Um, Alternatively, just putting in, I tend to use tracing sort of approaches and just drop in, and I can, depending on the length of it, I could just see how long it was in between sections. But I usually want to go off of some sort of timestamp so I can actually see the delta as it moves forward. It's not perfect, but it
Yeah.
does give you a relative sense of where it's at.
Okay.
How would you do it typically, Chad?
So that is basically what I would do. I do think because we do have the fprof
Mm-hmm.
thing, and we were specifically wondering how much time is spent creating the assignments versus the whole thing. We also could um
Yeah, let's try
we
that.
could answer that question without dropping timings
Mm-hmm.
by doing
Yeah.
fprof equals 1, because it will tell us how much time is spent in the factories for this spec relative to the total time. So, but it is what I would generally do.
There is other things that test-prof has in it that might be unrelated to the factories. I've got their web page up, and I'm taking a quick look to see if there's something else that might help us.
Okay, so it did answer, which is half of the test time is creating
It's assignments.
those factories, and it's not. It was 6.3 seconds of the total test time was factories, and 5.8 of that was the assignment factory. So it's half of the test time. We also have at least 3.2 seconds of loading.
Right.
One thing that can be useful is if you spot a problem and you don't know how to fix it, but you want to know the impact of what fixing it will do, is you basically comment it out,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
and then you run it again,
Yeah.
and you say, well, if I, in a best case scenario, if I can fix this problem, how fast is this spec going to be? And so that tells us that we can get the spec down when it's run in isolation,
Yeah.
to 7.49 seconds.
But it errored out, so let's make sure where it errored out to make sure
It
that.
errored out at the very last
Oh, okay.
thing.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was a crash or a spec failure. So yeah, because if it had crashed earlier, then we'd have to count for the time in the remaining code. But yeah, so that's it. Another question is, what can we do about it, if we can do anything?
Right. And so that was a savings of, do you remember where we started?
I want to say
7.22 when we ran it with Ruby JIT.
yeah, I thought it was 11.
Yeah, it was
originally.
11.58 seconds.
Okay.
So we'll get a savings of 6 seconds.
How
Sorry,
do you?
less than 6.
I'm sorry. What you
It's
were
not
saying?
6.
We'd get less.
I
than
messed
six-
up the math. It's
Okay.
not 6 seconds. It's 3.
If we fix this, we save 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. May not be our best use unless we have a lot of these throughout the code. But
Right.
this
So
is a
in
special
order to
case.
fix this, we've already established the code is dependent on having 6 months of assignments. So for a feature spec, there's essentially no way to not have 6 months of assignments. Now, another thing would be to get out of the feature spec for this and go to a view spec where we're stubbing out things.
True. Yeah, because presumably we're testing that in a model somewhere. It's a unit test for the model.
Right. So that is exactly the logic I would go through. It was the a assignment project should rotate method. So I would go over to, let's see if it's on the agenda. Should rotate, and then search in our spec file. So we didn't find it in. Sorry, I was surprised. Speechless. Went speechless for a second. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong. So project should rotate. So, and anywhere in the specs. So it looks like that method's not being called anywhere in the specs.
Except we know it's being called in the feature.
Not with that name.
Right.
It's not being it's being called in the implementation.
Yeah.
So if we were going to go to a view spec, so I'm surprised to see it, honestly, but that's the nature of applications sometimes, is something is only tested at the feature level. And that is often the slowest level to test things at. So I have I wasn't the one who implemented this, but I always love to give people the benefit of the doubt. The generous explanation for that is that they knew that creating 6 months of assignments was a very expensive operation.
Right.
And if they created a feature spec and a model spec for that method, then they were going to be creating 2 very slow specs that essentially test the same thing. And if I was aware of that while I was doing it, I would probably make the same choice, which is I would go for feature coverage, because then I'm testing the whole feature.
Especially if you know you can't reliably mock away some things at the feature level and still get the same result, then you'd have to make that choice. Yeah.
So if we were going to go to a view spec where that's being stubbed out, then we would have to move this logic and we're not changing the implementation. There's no other spec that tests whether that functionality works as expected. So we would need to move that. Again, if we're not changing the implementation, we need to change the creation of 6 months worth of assignments to a model spec. And so then we already established that that's the majority of the time in the spec.
So
we're not actually saving that much time if we make that change. I have another idea though.
Okay, so do I. What's yours?
Change this to be an assignment of just 1 day, and based on that implementation, it's gonna still pass.
Because in this branch we don't have that implementation.
We don't have that implementation, and the method only looks to see whether the person has been on the project for 6 months, not that they've been on the project full time for 6 months.
We can do that. See what it does. I imagine that would give us a big increase. That would probably raise a question. If that worked and the test passed, and the next thing that would probably happen to me while I was working on it would be going, and do I like that definition of rotate? Then that would raise all sorts of new questions for me.
Right. But it's not wrong, which is, okay, then if that's not what we want, we have a spec now which illustrates that that's the behavior, and changing the behavior would mean changing that spec, which is what we want.
Although you're also communicating that maybe that's how you intend the feature to be used. And is that what you want to communicate?
Yeah, that's a good point. How do you feel about this change?
Well, I like it just to verify the impact it's going to have. So I think it's worthwhile starting there. I still have the worry about what that means for a rotation, and what it brings up, but from just purely on a performance, probably what I would do is if that sped it up, I would probably then put an issue back into as a GitHub issue to talk about, is this the intended behavior, and have that discussion without necessarily trying to deal with it while I was focusing on test speed up.
Yeah. So we got the, with that change, we got pretty much the expected result, which is we went down to 7.11 seconds.
Which helps. So do you think it would work? And I'm betting I know the answer to this, but do you think it would work to change that create to a build?
No.
Because
it's a feature spec, which, so it's, we need to actually have the assignments created.
Yeah.
And if it was a model spec, then the implementation also would need
database lookup.
Database, because it is a database query.
I probably would be tempted at this point to actually look at that query and unit test around it, so that then I could mock away the I would try to find a way so I could get to a point where I didn't have to depend on the database for the test.
Yeah.
So
but then the question is spending that much time on this one spec worth it? And I would probably come back to, it's probably not worth it. And one way we can answer that for ourselves is going back to what we were saying before we went to the features, which was we're looking for things that are going to either affect more than one spec or give us information that we can then use to improve multiple specs. So one way to address that would be to peek into the next slowest spec. So what this functionality is doing is we have a time zone widget, so you can see across multiple people what the time zone overlap between them is. Oh no, this is showing it's showing the time zone overlap.
But do we need that many people on that one? It's pretty comprehensive. I mean, because you're picking up a lot of the time zones.
Right.
Okay. But that, again, to your point, that doesn't look general. We could speed up that particular test, but.
Right. And the other thing is, we know that person with position is a very heavy factory, but this time zone widget isn't going to show people who are not active, who don't have a position. So we need them to be that. Okay, let's just peek at the next slowest, which is pretty close. So this is a feature spec for commenting on a message. So this right away jumps out at me that this is just used to log in. So actually, in the application, it is possible to log in even if you don't have a position. And that's because users log in, people don't. So for a spec, when someone leaves thoughtbot, they're disabled like in Google authentication, and their user is disabled. So I just lost the spec. So we can change this to person, and it's
Yeah.
still going to work. Now, what this is doing, this spec is making sure that the person who created the message, when someone else I was wrong, because subscribers, I happen to know subscribers only, oh no, subscribers, it's active subscribers, which will only return active people. So let's just verify that change.
Are you saying that subscribers does require that one person to have a
I thought
position?
For a second that it did, but I don't think that it does.
Okay.
Oh. So what is failing though is where we're looking for how many subscribers there are, that is only active people. And so by making the person who was commenting not active, it changed it from a 2 to a 1.
And do you know this particular feature does depend on the JavaScript for the page?
Commenting depends on JavaScript, yeah.
Okay.
We're using Turbo streams to add the comment to the list of comments.
Okay.
Now, it's a good point, because that falls back to a full page load if JavaScript is disabled. And so that's a little bit of a philosophy thing, which is, do we want to test the fallback, or do we want to test the full behavior that most users are seeing?
So when I've done things like that in the past, I've sometimes done both of them, because the one without JavaScript usually isn't nearly as expensive. I don't think that'd be quite as true in this case because of the way we're building the test, but sometimes you get both. The second one's for free. Yeah. And it also depends on how much you think you might need that fallback.
So what I'm seeing here is, looking at this spec, is that, and I want to confirm this once I make the hypothesis, but looking at what the spec is doing very little with factories. It's creating the person and the message, and then it's going on and it's commenting. It's checking to see how many subscribers there are. It then makes sure that the emails went out as expected for that comment, and then it edits the comment multiple times to make sure that what's displayed when comments are edited, because we have functionality to view all the versions of a comment. So, and it says who created it, who edited it, those kinds of things. And so that's what it's doing. And you can see it's doing that. So it really is doing a bunch of stuff.
And that may be a good thing performance-wise, because of the cost of setting up the page and everything else. That may have been the cheaper way to do it. It would be interesting potentially if, and I don't know that it's worth it for this particular one because it's only a few seconds, but if we thought that the amount that it was doing might be contributing, as you did in the past one, just comment out the lower half of it and see, or some portion of it, and see just how expensive those individual operations are overall.
Yeah, so let's verify that. So, I meant to run it with. Oh no, I was running the right thing. Okay, so just the commenting functionality.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is 9.14 seconds. When it was running the full features and the browser was already spun up, it was 5.2 seconds, something like that. So that shows us the browser startup time. Okay, so So we basically want to comment out
And what's your guess that how much this will affect the time, given the nature of what they are?
30%.
Okay.
What's your guess?
I'm kind of betting it's less just because these are kind of cheap little changes. The only thing that would occur to me that might not be true about is just how much the round trips would be. But yeah, I'm kind of guessing it'll speed it up less than that. I'll go with 20%. You name something, I'll name something. Not just wave my hands and say, "Oh, that's close enough."
So I'm leaving this one. It's not actually editing, but I'm leaving it there because
Mm-hmm.
I see, because of the way Capybara works. Well, actually, I need to check something on the page in order to make sure that that code is executed before the database begins
Right.
to clean up. Okay, so let's see. 9.14 seconds was the original.
Oh, wow. More.
That's more than 30%, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, way more than I would have expected.
Um,
Why?
that's a good question.
Is page having to be repopulated every time?
It is a it is it is it is getting the page every time we like the page is changing. Yeah. But I don't know how I don't know how Capybara with Chrome driver works. I would assume it's a
Mm-hmm.
live pipe to the page. I don't know.
Yeah, we're expecting with Turbo though, it's not changing the entire page, it's
Right,
just
it's not
changing the
changing the
portion.
entire page.
But yeah, we're counting on the the um the memory allocator is probably being redone every time, even if the browser
Mm-hmm.
is being faithful with the Turbo, it's probably having to still put it into the page variable over again from scratch.
So let's get a sense of how so this slow part here is, or this part here is different than actually editing the comment. What this one is doing is just clicking on the different versions of the edited
Mm-hmm.
comment. So let's now put the edit back and we'll see how much of that time is just the editing of the comment
You have to
versus
put
how much is
360.
flipping
Sorry.
between the different versions.
Do you need 369 through 371 for that to be valid? In other words, will it present the edit in the page?
Yeah,
Is that it?
you're right. Yeah, see, it failed. So what I'm doing here, particularly because I'm screen casting, but I would normally do it to is either have a scratch pad on paper or a note digitally where I'm keeping track of numbers. So what I've
Mm-hmm.
done is I've written down 9.14 and 5.44. And so just so that I don't lose track. So 6.23 is what that is. So that means that 3 seconds of that, just clicking between the different versions of the thing, is 3 seconds of the total time. And that's where I would come back to the question that you asked, which is, why is that so slow?
Yeah, because this one actually might impact a lot of the different scenarios if
Yeah.
we can figure that out, depending on how stacked they are.
So I have a theory, and my theory matches what you were saying, which is this might not actually be slow in the application, and it might be the act of checking the page
Mm-hmm.
is actually the slow part. And I think we
Well,
could verify that by seeing what savings this is.
yeah, okay. As long as you left one of the pages in there.
Yeah.
And then what are we going to do about it? It's going to be the next question.
Okay, so it went
Well,
to 8.5.
not as much as I would have thought.
Right. So we're not back up to the total time, but we're just about a second, 1.2 seconds.
Is users defined once up above,
Mhm.
so the act of getting the name for the user and doing the string interpolation is not going to be much.
This is doing a request. Clicking, just so we're clear on the functionality,
Uh-huh.
it is loading via JavaScript the different versions. When you click on them, it replaces the comment that you see with the version that was there before. So it's doing 1, 2, 3, 4 additional requests.
Why do we have 385 through 389 when 379 through 383 seem to do the same thing? Oh, created versus updated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And this, look, the blame on this line was added 1 year ago, and I added this line 2 years ago. So
Uh-huh.
I can bet that this was introduced to test for a bug fix that was being made.
Yep, that makes sense. But do we really need to have, now this is minor in this particular test, but 386 may be gratuitous.
Right.
Not the click on, but the expect. Oh, you still need that page for to verify the read?
Which one are you talking about? What line?
You might need 385 in order to get the edit, but I don't know that you necessarily need to retest the page for the updated unless we think, or maybe it's 383.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to, is there spots where we don't need it? But no, never mind. I'm just thinking through it. I was trying to look for spots that maybe we didn't have to retest something, but each line is different. It's testing something different, so we kind of get away from that. The
But
closest
that's a good thing, and that is the other thing that can sometimes happen when you're looking at a spec. You realize this is no longer necessary. Either it was never necessary, and someone was just being thorough, and we don't really need it, or this was introduced or for something that was changed along the way, or it was introduced to prevent a regression at the time, but it's not so important. Like, it provided value at the time it was written, but it's not so important now.
It definitely happens.
Now, unless we find, so this behavior is dependent on JavaScript. There's no fallback for viewing the versions of an edited comment that doesn't use JavaScript.
Right. The only thing, and I don't think this would work, because I think it just moves it around. The only thing I was trying to play with is depending on the have content versus collecting the page, was there a way to do some caching and then not have to navigate the DOM in the same way?
Yeah.
Here, but it feels to me like we'd just be moving that time around one way or the other.
Right. And you could also look at, to go one step further, like we could load all the versions onto the page and switch between them with JavaScript
Hmm.
instead of doing requests every time.
Yep.
But that I would actually be opposed to that. If someone was initially implementing things that way, I would say that's wrong
Hmm. Yep.
because you're pushing the performance of every page load higher for a function that will almost never be used. It's better to only load the versions when someone actually wants to look at them.
Yep. Yep. Agreed.
So I don't know. I'm not seeing a savings here.
I'm not either, but now I know from doing that exercise that those expect pages and those click-ons are more expensive than I originally appreciated. So, which means that as I'm looking through other scenarios, I'm now armed with that information.
Right. The most expensive part was the requests.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think there was some code you copied in. Oh, no,
No.
no, there it is.
What?
Up above.
Oh, I moved it, right?
Yeah,
It
or
doesn't
something.
actually
Yeah.
matter, but
Yeah. Yeah. As long as we're not putting it in. Okay.
oops. I'm going to break more things trying to fix them than I.
That's what we get the test for.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm starting to get antsy because we've banged at a few things. We haven't found the thing yet.
Well, one thing, yeah, we have ended the features. Overall, it's not unusual that the features would be expensive, especially with the JavaScript turned on. It does perhaps suggest that you might do tags or some version to separate your tests out in such a way that you're not always running the feature specs when you're just going along your way and running RSpec from time to time. And if there's a way to run all of RSpec without running the feature specs, like as I'm developing models or other things like that, does that help improve the developer experience? Knowing that during CI or something like that, or if I'm actively working on things that would involve features that I do need to run those specs. So kind of breaking up the suite somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I'm not seeing it in the code so far because all the other tests that we're going to run are going to be not as slow as those two.
Right.
Unless we saw something that was repeated everywhere, even if it's not showing up in those.
So this is the slowest of the fastest of the top 10 slowest. And what it's doing is
Actually, though,
I'm
if you
wondering why
look,
this depends on JavaScript. Sorry, I
well,
interrupted
we
you.
could take it out and see what happens.
I realize it's because there's a rich text.
Oh, okay.
So there's a tricks component on this page.
Yeah.
There is I was going to say, we know this is an expensive factory. We could see whether that, but I don't know what the interplay is between organizers and, okay, yeah. So it's fine if it turns out that the organizer of the summit is not an active person, have a position. So just that change, reduced from 6.1 seconds to 5.6.
What was the change you made? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Change from person with position.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
Cool.
that is something I didn't do, which is, do you remember?
When you went through it earlier, you're thinking you just did in the model specs?
So yeah, it's that factory is still used 600 times. This is
Mm-hmm.
references in other factories. I think what I did was I eliminated it from being used in other factories primarily and not being used in specs.
That's actually great because you got a great return for what it was a small number of code changes. So yeah, actually, not that I necessarily would recommend this, but sometimes flipping it the other way, doing some sort of mass change, flipping them all back to person and see which ones you fail, and then go back and fix those with restore the with position. But you
Yeah.
don't really know that up front, which way that's going to, whether you're better off changing if it's less or more than half. The other one that was interesting, sorry,
No, go ahead.
the other thing that was interesting to me when you were running the profile 10 on there, while individual tests weren't that expensive, it looked like the messages spec overall as a group, as an
It was
example group.
45 seconds.
Yeah.
I noticed that too.
So there might be something that we're doing over there that would, I mean, even if we could save a half minute, that would be pretty substantial.
Yeah, and um the let's I want to just give this a try, but
Mm-hmm.
it might be that combining some of those features
Yeah.
would actually be the way to go. Okay, so running just this spec is 15.21 seconds. Or not just this spec, the whole file.
Okay.
So within the file, we can do what you were suggesting. And replace it with person. And
Let the
one, we'll see
chaos
whether we
ensue.
get any failures. We'll also see how much savings we get.
Mm-hmm.
I had run that one with the change and it didn't fail. Then I put it back. So I think all these are going to pass. Yeah. So we saved a half a second about.
Interesting. Which just means the bulk of the time spent the request.
Mm-hmm. But a half a second's not nothing, particularly since
Mm-hmm.
it's a easy change to make once we
Mm-hmm.
identify that there is a spec file where the functionality actually doesn't depend on person with position.
Yeah, you do enough of that, you starts adding up to some significant time.
Right. Okay, and that was a feature spec. See, now this one is where we will run into a problem. This is a feature spec. The reason why it's creating a person with position is because it's choosing the account manager in a list of people, and the list of people shows only people who have been at thoughtbot
Mm-hmm.
recently, which is they have a position in the last 4 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
Or in the upcoming 4 weeks.
But we would expect if we were to do the mass change, that
Mm-hmm.
test should fail, and we'd know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be yeah, so what you're suggesting
yeah,
is in all of the specs that aren't factories, we would we'd do a find and replace.
Mm-hmm. Should be exciting. This is usually the point where I make a new branch.
Okay, I'm canceling. Hold on. We didn't actually. Yeah. So the only change we've made was that view schedule one.
Yeah.
Changing it.
Instead of, if it ended up being most of them failed, at least I could retreat back quickly.
Right. So I'll just commit this. Wait, is this one? I just want to commit that one file.
Okay.
Change rotation check to 1 day. Okay. So now let's replace. Oh, that wasn't just features, actually. That was everywhere.
No, that was everything. Yeah. So, I mean, you could run the full R spec, but
let's just run the
10 minutes.
features and see what the extent of the damage is.
Yeah.
Actually, while that runs, let's take a 5-minute break.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Be back in 5, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the other side of the break. welcome back.
Our break was shorter than the tests.
That's a bad sign when we're trying to improve test performance.
Yeah.
Well, while the tests run, I have. So I think people like unboxing videos, right? So I got a delivery while we were streaming. This is. So I have played a lot of D&D. I've been playing more in person, and so I have 1-inch tiles for maps, but I don't have larger ones for like huge monsters and large monsters. So I got those in different sizes. They're covered though. They're colors. They're like different colors. But then I also, the only in-person map I have is this one, which is a foldable whiteboard, so it's rigid. And that's not great for traveling because I can't fold it up smaller than that box. And so I got a Cheswick's battle mat that's full, like, it's still dry erase, but it rolls up.
So what I just heard you say is that 1, you need to schedule a trip so you could try that out, and 2, you probably need to schedule a game if you don't already have one planned this weekend to try out the new tiles.
Yeah, this weekend's tough. My kids are in a robotics competition this weekend for the state finals, so.
Oh wow, that's a big deal.
It's gonna be the majority of our weekend.
Oh wow, cool.
Okay, that was good vamping. Our specs finished. And we got an unboxing on the stream, so that's... Yeah. We're real streamers now.
It's a Good Friday, yeah.
Okay, so we had a lot of failures. 109 out of 508 failures.
Not terrible.
That's not bad. Sorry, out of 508 examples. And the reason why that's not terrible was because we did like 500 replacements, right? So
potentially cheaper to hunt those down than the other way around.
Mm-hmm. What I don't know, or I don't have a built-in quick way to do this, which would be to put... Oh, I guess you could do it in Git. You generate a list of the files. So like we've got the list of files, and then you check out each one of them again to restore it back to what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But that wouldn't, like, it's possible that this file has, 4 specs, only 3 of them are failing, even with the change we made.
Yes. And it's a fairly straightforward mechanical change. So even if you couldn't automate being able to restore someone back by the line numbers, going in and manually do it probably wouldn't take you all that long. So it probably wouldn't be your most fun hour of the day, but probably wouldn't take a terrible amount of time. The real question is, how much time do we save?
Oh, right. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah. So now it's 5 minutes, but I don't know that bought us much.
So it's 5 minutes and 48 seconds with 109 failures. So, those failures are going to change the timing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what it was before?
9.14 or 9.41? No, that was for just the, did you ran the entire suite or just on features?
I ran just on features.
I think your note that you wrote down said 9.41 or 9.14.
That was just for that one spec we were working on.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the scroll back has taken up all the scroll back. I don't want to run the features again. I'm just trying to remember. It was 6 minutes.
Yeah, I
It
didn't
was,
think this bought us that much.
yeah, it didn't. Um, so best
Which,
case scenario, it probably is going to save about 30 seconds,
hmm
which isn't nothing. Um,
yes, but the feature specs overall are almost half of the overall test suite time.
right.
So we might need to find something else that buys us some of that back.
I'm just going to start the model specs with that change running in the background so we can see the models are currently 3 minutes of the total time. So
Okay.
we'll see whether there's more savings there. So what we said before the break was we were thinking about the messages feature spec
hmm
and how that was 45 seconds out of the total test suite. Um, even though any one individual spec wasn't that long, I think they were averaging 2 seconds or something.
Right.
So there are 18 scenarios in this spec.
Was there something at the top that was being repeated for all of them? Yeah, a round example. There it
It's
is.
putting the
Just
accessibility audit skipping.
and I'd imagine that wouldn't add that much time.
No, I don't think so. There's 18 scenarios. Let's see how many of them. 16 of them require JavaScript. So that would be something to look at is like, do they actually require JavaScript? In this case, I know the answer is in theory, yes, because messages are entirely tricks, rich text area fields. So unless I'm not even sure what we could possibly do.
Well, you could potentially look through the specs and see, and it looks like that's not going to buy as much, but you could look through them and see if they're doing as much as you can per spec to reduce the page loads. But the page loads have so much to do with it that doesn't look like that would buy you anything. I was hoping we'd come in here and find something kind of a repeated action that we could get a gain on.
Yeah, so I am actually like so this what am I trying to say? I'm noticing that it is posting the message.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you need to do that, you have to create a valid message, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then we specifically have this spec here. Oh, this isn't doing what I thought it was doing. Sorry. I thought it was doing something else, but what this spec is doing is it's testing. We have a library in the app. Well, actually, it's not a library. We wrote it, and it's not generic outside of this app yet. But basically, what it does is it saves forms in local storage, so that if you close the page accidentally or something like that, and then you go back to it, the form is filled with what you were filling it out with. And that's what this spec is testing.
Okay.
So it fills out all of the fields and then leaves the page, and then comes back and asserts that the fields are still filled out with what you filled them in with.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the spec was doing something else. So,
Well, what went through my mind as you were describing that, I don't know if the test revealed that, but if that test or one of the other ones is doing that over and over in a way that we could eliminate one of the tests because it was being captured by a part of another test, that might bias something.
mm-hmm.
But I'm not seeing evidence of that.
Here's one. We also have the functionality to save as a server-side draft when you're composing a message and you know you're going to leave, or you're drafting it or scheduling it. This is a case where a message is being created. There's a typo here. It bugs me not to fix the typo, but the message is being created and then saved as a draft and published. Then here we have message being saved as a draft, then deleted. We already know that the posting of every single spec that is posting messages is creating messages, and this spec here is already testing that saving as a draft works. And so this individual spec doesn't need to create a message.
What does the rest of that test do?
It merely deletes the message that was created through the browser.
Okay.
So we could get a small savings here. Okay, so our model spec's finished. Let's pause and look at that. We know that there are 3 minutes total. It took longer.
It had more failures to write out.
Yeah. And so
Wow.
It's 2,452 examples and 129 failures. So similar to the feature level of failures. That was 109.
Yeah.
108.
But in both cases, we're not saving any time. I don't know why the models would have gone up unless something else was going on. But
or I'm misremembering how much time the models were.
That sounded familiar, what you said. And this is why, because of what we both did, this is why earlier in this stream we had mentioned writing down the numbers. So
right.
we're showing you why.
So again, while we're I see thanks everybody for watching. If you've got questions or suggestions, definitely drop them in the chat, or keeping an eye on that. So I just wanted to call that out. What were you going to say, Richard?
So before we were starting to look at the models, we were trying to see if we could save some time on saving the messages. What I'm not sure about, even though we don't necessarily need to worry about the draft, is are we thinking that if we simply populate the message like a create message here, we can just go straight to that without, we still would have to render the messages page though.
We would only have to do, yeah, so what making that change, well, let's just do it and we talk about what we're saving as we do it. So we're going to change it to create a message. And in this case, I can tell we're not checking the title and body. Oh, wait, we are. Right here. But it's not important to preserve it. So we're saving the visit to the messages path and then clicking on post message filling in the stuff and saving as a draft. So we need to make this message as a draft. I think it's status. Status draft. I bet there's a factory. Yeah, there's a trait to create draft messages. So we just do draft.
Yep.
And then we visit the messages path directly for that. Oh, hold on. Oh, yeah. Okay. You click on save as a draft to get the draft.
Do we even need to do those two?
No. So now instead of browsing through the messages path rather, we can do. So now we're no longer, the factory is creating an interest for us.
What you just changed on 235 went from the index page to the show page?
Yeah.
And that's not a concern for the nature of that test?
No, not this one. And there's other ones like the saving a draft. This whole first section of the spec is what we just deleted.
Right. What I was thinking is, were we going to expect different behavior about deleting a draft from if the index page supported that versus the show page supporting it?
It doesn't. You have to go to the show page and delete the draft.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that should be good.
So and then we need to change this to make sure that
you might have to save that message or that title before you save it, because I don't know that message.title. No, it should be fine because we didn't delete it from the test. We deleted it from inside.
And it's going to be message with a number, so it's going to be unique.
Yeah. Okay.
I messed that up.
We don't know how fast the test was before.
Okay. Right. Right. Actually, I'm guessing it's 5.09 seconds because I don't think I saved the file the first time I ran it. So let's just put it back.
Okay.
So with the change, it was 4.82 seconds. Okay.
Oh, that was pretty good. Yeah. Got a couple seconds out of it.
Yeah, so almost 2 seconds saved with that change.
Yep. And you get to test the redo key.
So what this spec is testing is saving and scheduling of messages. So we have the ability to, when you're posting a message, schedule it to be published later. So we go to create a message, but then instead of clicking on publish, we click on schedule for later. We set the time, and then we post the message. So this is unique functionality.
Yeah.
And we need to do it while creating the message. Yep. Browsing
What
messages by sorry, go ahead.
when you go back to dashboard and messages up there, it's because we want to leave that page and then verify we can still find it after that's been done to it, the scheduling.
That's a good question. Is that why? I mean, it's pretty superfluous, I think, actually.
Sometimes when I initially write tests, and I
Yeah.
don't know that would happen here, is I'll throw in code because I'm actually trying to let the system tell me, but I don't really need it as a regression.
Right. And I find what you're really, you're doing it as test-driven development because,
Hmm.
I wrote this spec. And I would have written the majority of this spec before I wrote any of the functionality. That will be my general flow is I'll go through and I'll imagine or I'll have a design and I'll be saying, okay, click on post message, click on schedule for later. And I literally go it all out. And so, yeah. So at the very least, there comes a point in the life cycle of a spec where you don't really need to do this.
Hmm.
And you could just change it to visit messages path. And even that is going to be slightly faster than 2-page clicks.
Hmm.
Um, so let's compare those changes actually. So this spec, starting the browser, 8.5 seconds. So if we instead just go back to the messages page and double check, that brings it to 8.1.
Half a second, a little more.
And then we also could say, like, I don't even really know what this is. Again, yeah, I think you're right. I think it was written this way because we're like writing the functionality out before it's written. So if we just get rid of this completely, I think it's going to be under 8 seconds now. Yeah. 7.7 seconds.
Shaved a second, almost.
So yeah, so we saved, nearly a second off of this one spec. And I still feel good about this spec.
Hmm.
I think it's testing what the functionality is supposed to be. So here's an interesting thing. Moving on to this next scenario. This scenario is browsing messages by interest. Actually, and the majority of the spec has no dependency on JavaScript at all until you get to this filtering functionality. And this filtering functionality uses, if JavaScript is available, will refresh the page with your search, the filters that you've done without submitting the form. And that's what this is doing. It's exposing the filters, filling in the title or body search box with test, and then tabbing out of that so that the JavaScript triggers.
Yep. And that's actually the object of the test are those two lines, right? Because we're trying to confirm that we can find it by interest.
Yeah, but it doesn't match the doc string of the spec is browsing messages by interest, and the filter is just testing searching by a title or a body content.
This is where trying to improve performance sometimes runs afoul of the idea of test one thing at a time, so you actually know what's going on. And it could be that was added to that test just to save some time.
Right. Now, there are other filter specs that do the index of messages.
Oh.
And the reason why this is here for the interests is because while the pages look almost identical, they're not the same. The index, the listing of messages is a partial. So the message filters and the listing of messages is here, but the top of an index page is entirely different. And so that's why even though there's filtering for the messages listing, it's another page for viewing an interest. So we want to make sure that the filtering functionality is still there and still works on that separate page.
Okay.
But let's just, for the sake of exploration, remove the JavaScript true. And, oh, wait, I got to remember, we'll run this spec to see how long it actually takes. This is going to be a little bit misleading because we have the browser boot time and we're going to lose the browser boot time. So we need to remember the browser boot time was about 3 seconds, or two and a half seconds. So the real runtime of this spec is 3.4.
Still, if you think the spec can run without JavaScript, that's still time you're saving. Oh, but you're saying it starts at the beginning of the entire suite, so that's why we don't have to count it. Yeah, that makes sense.
So then if we remove that filter thing and we change it to be not JavaScript.
In fact, yeah, now it's second. Though I'd imagine most of that came from the JavaScript itself. The JS true.
Yep. And now looking at this spec further, I think it's creating too much. It's creating more than is necessary. So we can probably get a further savings here. So here's what I'm thinking. We have this scenario is browsing messages by interest. It's basically a test of the being able to go to an interest and see just the messages for that interest. And we were also testing the filters while we were there.
Right.
It might be a bigger savings to, instead of doing that, if we go to one of the other tests, which is testing filtering by title, which is exactly what that test was doing. These interests are required in order to post a message. So there has to be an interest on the messages that we're creating and running in this JavaScript spec. Right. And so if we were to, as part of this spec, go over to the interest page and do the same test and make sure do the same filter and make sure we get the same result, then we're testing that, and we're saving needing to run that other spec in the Chrome browser.
So you basically, by doing that, we're saving the setup time, the additional setup time for the second test.
Well, and generally these tests are the non-JavaScript tests are gonna be faster
Mm-hmm.
because they're not
Right.
communicating with Chrome and doing the full page renders and everything.
So this one that you're in right now, that also was not a JavaScript test?
It is a JavaScript test.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I'm saying move the one little piece of that other test that needed JavaScript into this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's run this spec because we want to see for science how much it goes up when we add the other thing we're going to add to it. So we're at 5.04. So now what we want to do is visit I accidentally put this up here, but and I need to make sure that these messages, I can just tell, have the same interests. That's actually going to be a slight performance improvement there because we're not creating more interests.
True. True. Is interest another association? Oh, it would be another association because those aren't just messages. Okay.
So we went from 5.0 basically to 5.7.
But we got rid of the other test, or a portion of the other test.
A portion of the other test. So the overall savings from this, actually we can, so now the overall time for running these two specs is 5.89. Oh, we still have our...
Yeah, we got the other pieces there too. But we probably got a little bit out of it, like maybe a half second.
What I'm thinking is just so we can get a sense of our cumulative changes. I want to make sure that all the specs pass. And then we can, it was about 45 seconds before. Yeah, it looks like we have at least one failure.
Yeah, we're in a few, I think, from the person with position issue.
There's more failures than I was hoping we'd get here. 4 failures. Um, what that means, assuming we're about the same time, then we've gone from 45 seconds to 40 seconds.
Yeah. So we're having to do, so even though these feature specs are taking up a lot of the overall time of the spec, we're having to go through quite a bit of analysis to try to eke out a few seconds
Right.
here and there. Which is hard, right? Because there's reasons why all of these things are, one, separated, and two, why they have to stand up the browser and do all these connections.
Right. So we just got a half of a second by moving some stuff around and dropping the filters, but I'm looking and saying there are individual features for basically every single filter that's on the page. So you could set up a set of messages and then do the filters in them. What you lose in that when you do that is granularity of when one of the filters breaks. It's a little bit harder to tell which one sometimes, or when something breaks in a combined spec, it's a little hard. I actually think the filters are fine grained enough. It's very obvious if we're testing each one at a time which one's not working.
And given the nature of filters, you wouldn't expect there to be much interdependency between them. So if they are put into the same spec, it's not that we're having to worry about state leaking or anything like that.
Oh, that's probably why the specs are written as separate, because the filters do combine.
Okay.
And so you would need to like put it back. If you didn't want to combine the filters one after another, you would need to put it back after each time.
I'm just trying to think if there's a way to save state and then just reset back to it directly.
There's a reset button on the form, but that's going to do.
That's another load.
It's another load.
Yeah.
So that, while potentially promising, is not really going to save much time across this spec. But that's the kind of change we should be looking for, because the spec is 40 seconds long, because it has so many examples in the spec doing so much.
Yep. I'm trying to think semantically if most of that time is because we have so many different filters rather than other message functionality.
So while something else just jumped out at me, it's a super small savings, but it's the kind of thing that applied across the whole suite would speed things up. So we know that person is an expensive factory.
Yes.
And we already got a savings by changing the message factory to use person instead of person with position. But we're creating two messages here, and we're creating a person. And the only thing we're using this person for in this spec is to log in. And the person doesn't matter for the spec. So there's a few different ways we could address that, but one would be to use that person for creating the messages.
Okay.
So now we've just saved the creation of two unnecessary
Yep.
people. We could, does it save the, is this one less person? If we did user, is this one less person being created? I think it is.
So what is message, the first message using?
It's using the person created in the message factory. So one person is being created in this scenario, whereas
Aren't you creating
one was
two people?
creating before.
Because you got user.
Yeah, user doesn't create a person.
Oh, okay. Okay. So person has a user, it's not the other way around. Okay.
Right.
Okay. But you're creating two users.
Creating, oh, right. Oh, okay. Right now you do need to be a person in order to post a message.
Okay.
So again, this is the kind of change where I didn't actually put it all the way back, where the savings we would get from this one spec isn't that much.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a strategy that is probably applicable in a lot of places.
Yes. Yeah. It is, at least it, as you work with it, you start looking for that as you're going through all of the tests and kind of recognizing it's just something even though you're not necessarily getting it back out of one particular test, if you're always just paying attention for it in that setup, over time, especially as you're writing new ones, you're going to tend to write short or more performant tests. So I want to ask you, and it has nothing to do with the test strategy.
Yeah.
But you and I haven't paired that much together. So I wanted to ask you, I noticed that, how do you feel about the implicit value on a key?
What do you mean the implicit value on a key?
So like one of your messages, you had person, person, and you could drop the second person. And I wanted to see if you had a thought if there was something you didn't like doing that for. So like on, it's 535, you should be able to drop that second person, I would assume, same variable.
You're right. It would never occur to me to do that.
Okay.
Part of the reason why must be, when was that introduced?
It was pretty recent. I think it was either 2.7 or 3.0. It was, but yeah, it's not.
That would
took me a while to
part
switch
of the
over.
reason why. It just is not at all part of what I would do. And I would be curious how many people watching now I'm blanking. Do I need the colon or?
You need the colon.
Okay.
That lets it know that you are using a key value pair. But yeah.
And so this is going to pass.
Yeah, it's interesting because depending on when and where you do it, sometimes it makes the code more readable or less readable. I tend to always now write the shortened form, but not everybody likes that style, so that's why I asked.
I am just trying to think. I think it is possible that I have never used this feature before.
Oh, okay.
In JavaScript, I've used the similar
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Now I find myself naming variables such that I can get away. It's just like
Yeah.
naturally because I'm taking advantage of it.
This is the kind of thing where having never used it before, and it's certainly not in this code base, when you first see it, it's like it looks really wrong.
Uh-huh. Yep.
It's
It
like
does.
clearly something is missing.
Yep.
But I can tell that it's the kind of change that I could get used to.
Yeah, what Dyson's talking about is exactly why I started doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of doing it in the parameters is kind of the first place it becomes convenient. So, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get used to wherever. But in this particular case, it is a parameter. So yeah, which is normally where it shows up, I think, in general.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good question. You might be changing the way that I do things, but not yet.
Yeah. Takes a little practice. Took a little while to train my eye.
So
And
go ahead.
I think you're right, Dyson. I think Rubocop wasn't a fan of it at the beginning. Now it'll flag me, which is part of why I got into the habit, is that Rubocop, at least the way I had it set, would
Mm-hmm.
flag me when I did add it unnecessarily. It said that was redundant. So that's probably what trained me to stop using it.
That must have been a setting on the particular app you were working on.
It was, yeah, because
Yeah,
it's
because
not
we
part of our
use standard
standard.
RB on
Yeah.
Hub, and it's obviously not complaining there.
Yeah.
So this is another, so even just the next spec was so this one might be dependent on you not being the person who created the message, because I think the default filters don't show you your own messages, I think, but let's.
And that's always the concern with changing this kind of test, because you're not quite sure what the intent of the prior developer might have been.
Mm-hmm.
It can be subtle.
Yeah, so it still passes, which is fine. I was just worried that it wouldn't. So yeah, I'm seeing this pattern a lot in this spec. Right? So even the next one.
Yeah. Two messages for each.
This one, almost all these specs are creating multiple messages. So, we could shave off another half second or so, I bet, from this spec.
By repeating it overall. Yeah.
So it seems like a fairly reasonable change to me. But it's not how I would, to your point, like, okay, this is a thing which should influence the way we write specs in the future. And we should be mindful that these factories are expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the way I would usually write a spec, like the conservation of calls. But I should.
But especially when you're following TDD and you're first just writing it to get the logic out, it's even less likely you're thinking about the conservation until after you've finished the functionality and going back through and cleaning up or what have you.
Right. So this one is specifically making an author person
Mm-hmm.
because the spec is testing filtering by author,
Mm-hmm.
and you wouldn't want them all with the same person because then you're not going to be able to filter out one of them. But it creates a person that is only used for logging in.
We actually are creating 3 people.
Right, when we can get by with only creating 2 people.
Yeah.
So if we could use author there, or we could use
Or you
the
could use
person
other
on the other
message
message.
person. Well, you got an implicit one in other message as well.
Mm-hmm. But we want
You want
it
that
needs
one
to be a
distinct.
different one.
Yeah. Okay. Now, to your earlier point today, sometimes because it's so heavy, the logic of this test is so much around person, sometimes it's worth adding another line after 513 to go ahead and explicitly state that, hey, I'm creating another person, even though we know it's in the factory.
Yeah. I didn't run this spec before making the change, and it's failing because this list of authors
Mm-hmm.
only shows active people. So as I say that, my mind went to what I was doing earlier today, which was resolving n+1 queries
Mm-hmm.
on the app itself. And position on people is something that we often need to eager load in order to avoid the n+1 query.
Right.
And person just needing to create all these positions, all these records, just to get someone to appear in a drop down on the page
Yeah.
is one of the most inefficient things in our test suite.
Yep.
So that's the kind of thing where caching an active flag on people based on their positions would have not only a significant improvement on the test suite,
Uh-huh.
but on the application itself, we would be
Yep.
completely removing the need to eager load positions when we're just populating a drop down, when we're just getting the active subscriber. So if you look at the subscribable concern, that is subscribers, and then it also has an active subscribers, and that uses the active scope. That's coming from the person. Loaded the model, the spec rather. Oh, and that's using position. And what that's doing is active positions for the current date. And that's doing this query.
Yeah. So that's the second spot that we found. This one's more valuable, but that's the second spot that we noticed a caching opportunity. And that isn't just about speeding up the test, but that has effects overall, which is part of the value of working through the tests in general.
Right. And positions never, the other thing I would look at when making this kind of change, not a test, like, but it's like, when does it make sense to cache?
Yeah.
And one way where I know to avoid caching is if in managing that cache is especially difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Managing the position, a position cache is not that difficult because we don't, there's only one place that positions are created. There's a very specific point of the application that manages positions,
And they don't change
and they don't change very
position.
often.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. And also, I'm wondering, yeah, we already have some callbacks, which when a position changes, it goes and updates all the
Mm-hmm.
departments and work teams and billable flags on any
Yeah.
assignments associated with that. So we would do a similar thing there when a position is saved. Um, well, the concept of whether someone is active or not potentially changes even when the position doesn't change.
Right. Right.
And if
That
the
would
end
depend on the
date
person. Yeah.
comes for someone's position, then they need to be not active.
Still, caching the
Yeah.
position is going to buy us something because it's so expensive. I mean, you see all those callbacks on the before save and so forth every
Mm-hmm.
time you're doing something with the
Mm-hmm.
positions,
Mm-hmm.
even if you can't cache the other pieces.
Yep. So another thing we could cache instead of an active flag, it would be the end date of
Yeah.
their last position. That would be nil if there's no end
Mm-hmm.
date.
Yep.
And then a lot of that active stuff and everything would just be based off of that date on the person.
Yep. Yep. And that's probably not that expensive because it's just some checks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm actually pretty optimistic about that change in general, just because I do know how much loading of positions happens throughout the application.
Well, that'll be interesting doing that, and then seeing whatever effects. Because once that's done, that's going to hit across the entire test suite.
Mm-hmm.
See how that see what that gain is, because it's not obvious until we kind of went
Right.
through some of the other things we went through.
Right. So in the test suite, we would want to change it so that it's possible to create an inactive person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, an active person without creating positions for them.
Yeah, you're essentially having to do some additional tests, maybe not much, but to deal with the fact that now you've got these scenarios that involve the cache.
We would probably, since the current factory is an active person, we would probably make that would be the default, that no positions are created, but they are active. That's a scenario, that's a little risky because that's a scenario that's not possible in the actual production application.
It's essentially a mock when you're doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's always, like you said, that's always dangerous. Especially because it won't necessarily be apparent to the people writing tests if they're not familiar with the factory.
Right. And so what that would look like is, let's just factories person assuming that we did, so right now a person with positions is having a position created for them that when does it start and end? It starts in the evaluator starts on and ends on the evaluator ends on. Where's that set? Oh, it's the position factory. So it starts on 1 year ago at the beginning of the week. And no ends on date.
So what was the other starts on the person? Was that going over to, was that ended up going over to position in the, when you're setting, oh, that was
Yeah.
position. Okay, got it.
So that's interesting because assuming that the strategy for caching this is an end date on a person, then nil means the person is active.
Mm-hmm.
So the default factory being an active person and having the impact of not creating positions as a result of that change means just creating a person with an ends on of nil and no positions, and that would be an active
Mm-hmm.
person.
Yeah. So I know we only have a little bit of time left, but if we were going to implement that cache, where would we do that?
I would do it. I would make a migration. Okay, we would need to make sure we have spec coverage for the parts of the application that we might be breaking
Mm-hmm.
with the change. Now, the spec coverage is pretty good. And so, but what I would be concerned about is that we know we're making this change because we want to also change the factories.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would be concerned about in the process of changing specs for performance reasons, we get a lot of red at the same time as we're making the functional change. And that red masks an actual bug that we're introducing. Because we say, oh, that failure is because we changed the factory. So I would definitely, and this is an important piece
Mm-hmm.
of our app, right? So I would definitely make the change independent of actually changing the factories.
Right.
So I'm just focused on a pull request that introduces the caching and doesn't change the person with position factory at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just changes it so that we introduce an attribute on person, which is their end date. And we introduce a callback on position that when positions are created, updated, or deleted, that they manage the end date on the person. And I wouldn't, and making that change should be like model specs for just that change, but shouldn't break or need to change any other specs in the application. Everything else should keep on working.
Right. So yeah, that's the part you have to make sure you do. As you're making the change for the cache, you have to add some specs to that particular model to deal with that because the factories aren't going to show that to you because you're
Right.
leaving them explicit.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And then the other thing is like that position. We would have a choice, which is does Actually, this is on position. I'm not even sure. So so right now, for example, this spec here, it's the assignment spec. It's getting the position for the person that was active during that time period. And what it's doing with that is getting the department and the team, and it's making sure that assignments, when they're created, the person has a position on that date. So I would be inclined to, especially on the first pass, not change that functionality to use our new cache, because this functionality actually needs the position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely want to go stepwise through this.
Right. But the person class uses like this scope to find active people. It's not data, it's for today. It's doing active during today. It's only, what it's doing is it's plucking the IDs, and it's doing this for performance reasons, plucking the IDs of all the active people and then getting those people. That method I would change that to use the new column.
It's interesting too, because in the one that's depending on the assignments, most of the time that'll matter is either for their current position or because you're booking something near term. In other words, it's not going to generally matter for anything in the past.
Right.
So yeah, while you need to protect it, it's probably still not going to be that expensive that you didn't deal with it in the cache.
I don't want to overestimate how big of a change this would have on the spec performance, but I think it would be a lot.
Yeah.
Because of how many not only specs create positions, but the things that create positions, like they do a lot of things, and then all the page loads that are eager loading or joining against positions, that all adds up, not only for real world production performance, but for spec performance as well.
Well, we know that the three most expensive factories are around the assignments, person and user, or position.
Right.
Person position. So yeah, it should impact. In fact, might discover that we don't really need person with position. We could just have person have a position via the cache.
Well, that would be an even large. So the way to do that, if you go to the factory, the person model now, you can see that team department, company, employment, those are already cached from the position on there. And we're doing that for exactly this this reason. So yeah, then at that point you don't need, if we have end date, that's like the last field from position that's not cached on person. So at that point we could change the person factory to be without a position and just populating those.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting possibility. It would take a little while because of the extent of the change, but I think I would probably estimate we could probably save another minute, maybe a little bit more, based on, because we had changed the we had done the global change and had the failures, so that gives me a little bit of idea of the savings. We wouldn't necessarily want the person factory to default to creating a company, department, employment type, and team, because it's not now.
Right. Yeah.
And
that
so
would
we
be
would
more
be
expensive.
introducing that back.
Yeah.
But we could certainly have like, hey, I need a fully baked person with a position. It would basically be levels, which is like, hey, person factory creates like an active, or there's a factory that creates an active person that's not, fully built out.
Right. Yeah.
And then another level, which is like, hey, give me a person that's a more lightweight person that doesn't have positions, but has like, I really needed to have a team or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the full level of positions are created and all that stuff. Well, awesome. We're a little bit over time, actually. We got carried away with this final thing. Well, I feel like based on the work we did today, we didn't actually make one significant change that dropped the test suite failures again, test suite speed again. But we identified one change where we have like 28 specs to update, and then we'll have the savings of, I forget what it was, 30 seconds, something like that.
Yeah.
I feel like we should do that. It's relatively straightforward to finish that up, and we've got that in a branch, and I can wrap that up. Great. We identified a new strategy of realizing that person is expensive and not creating ones we don't need in the specs. And that also goes for, I didn't mention it then, but we're often creating a person just to log in and then doing things you don't need a person to do. So we should review all the times we're logging in and making sure we actually need a person when we need the person.
Yep. And also getting a chance to just explore some of these areas and seeing where, we may not be able to get that much more out of, say, some of the features other than like you said, changing the person. You'd kind of know where to spend the time. Might be over in the models or somewhere else.
Right. And then we identified a big change both to the application and to the test suite, which potentially saves, a minute or a little bit more. It's a high effort, fairly high, like touch change, but I'm excited by it because it would also have a performance impact on the actual production application too.
Absolutely. And I'm actually a little more optimistic about the amount of overall time it's going to save.
It'll be more?
Yeah.
Possibly. Well, let's find out.
Yeah, we got some more to do, so it'll be great.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for watching. And if you've got, again, if you have an application that has performance problems either in the test suite or outside of it, or you just are looking for some great developers to build a new product, developers and designers to build a new product, improve an existing product, explore a new idea, or we're here for you. And just get in touch at thoughtbot.com. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.